Welcome, friends. My name is Shanae Trudeau, and I'm here with Bhavani Maki for another episode of the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. As always, we want to take a moment to thank our listeners. Your participation means so much to us. Please tell a friend if you like what you hear. And as always, a 5-star review means so much to us podcasters. It's how we can get found and how more listeners can find us. Thank you for spending your time and attention with us today. Bhavani, what a joy and an honor to be in conversation with you.
Aloha, Shanae. Great to have our sutra clutch
Yeah.
together.
Oh, I love it. So we both share a deep love and respect for Martin Prechtel and his writings. He speaks and writes extensively about how everyone has an indigenous soul, and it's a process, a journey to work for a time we won't live to see. And this is what makes us worthy ancestors, worthy of descending from. So when I first read his book, Secrets of the Talking Jaguar, I said to myself, oh, this is yoga. He's studying and teaching yoga. Did you have the same feeling?
Um, I had a deep feeling, and I don't know that I went there that this is yoga, but yes, this is what yoga is also speaking to, which is something that is so deep within us. And, it's been so interesting in the Kaivalya, which is where it just speaks about getting back in touch with that original creative kind of seed within us that and even tapas as being this longing for something more primal, for more whole, for something holy, something sacred, something that can't be grabbed onto. And yet it's kind of like that part of us where we're basically just water molecules experiencing consciousness, and there's that consciousness that is threaded within all of us and how we're accessing that. So yeah, it really did feel that way to me. It was one of those, it's like when something really speaks to that part of your soul, it like kind of fleshes out the picture and the web. um so yeah, I would definitely say that. And it gave me another context, because having been raised in the yoga tradition, in the indigenous tradition, and I can really see that there is a certain fire, a certain spark, a certain element when you've had that kind of relationship with a teacher who's been held and raised in a tradition that is beyond the literary annotation. And it's like, well, what is that?
Yeah,
Well,
speak about that.
yeah, and that's like the energetic resonance, or shakti, which is where it's the creative energy that's manifesting itself and driving all of nature. And it creates like this vortex of the Vyutana manas and the Nirodha manas, which is like how we're living in the world. And the world gives us a reflection of what's happening on the inside, and manifest and unmanifest levels of it. It's so big, it's so hard to talk about, um, because it's a transmission. And it's one of those things when we're in touch with it, it's that anushasanam. It's where your cells light up, because there's such a cellular memory. There's transmission in all these layers of your being, even beyond the 3 dimensions of Jati Desha Kala, of which incarnation you're in, which era you live in, the culture and the place of your birth. It's like such a deep ancestral memory. And I remember, asking Patabi Joyce, like, well, how old are the sutras? And of course, you're going to have all kinds of scholars who are going to refute this, but depending on the scholar, there's scholars who are basically, they're just theoretical. Um, they haven't necessarily been raised in a tradition and had that heart to heart, like the contact. There's something that happens there that we all feel. And sure, science can explain it. And, I just want to say on a side note, like there's so many, there's just this proliferation on the internet about like health sciences and kinesiology and whatever. And it's like, they're like, well, what they're saying isn't true because science hasn't proven it. And I'm just like, God, that is so myopic. There's things that we know that are true through our direct experience. And just because somebody hasn't created a test or a board that somehow affirms it doesn't make it untrue. So, it's like even these translators, and they're like, oh, this is from the time of Buddha, or this is the time from that. If you really start to like everybody has a piece of the puzzle, but then there are those who say this style of Sanskrita is 40,000 years old. And then you talk to someone who's been like not only raised in a tradition, but there's also like a bloodline, there's a DNA line. And fortunately for us, they, whether it's the diaspora or timing or, Krishnamacharya as a luminary, where, these indigenous people have allowed certain people to come into the tradition. They're not biological family, but there's deep samskaras, there's deep vasanas that this, you can tell, like, when that person walks in the room
Yeah.
and what you're sharing, and you can see like something that was hibernating inside of them comes alive and flowers, and it's like every part of them is saying yes, and we live for those moments, right? And they're very, very rare people. They may have the inkling, but they're still too distracted or whatever, they're not there yet. So when I asked him, he was like, Bhavani, this is very, very old. And I was like, well, how old, Guruji? And he looked at me and he said, older than the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So we're, again, it's this myopia. If it hasn't been proven, if it hasn't been documented, if it hasn't been written down or, put in some microfiche somewhere, it doesn't exist. And that, of course, is the myopia of our human species. And in the sutras, like in the Shantipat, also it says this is where we get into trouble.
Yeah. Because
we're the only species that tries to lord over nature. And because of that, we see ourselves as separate from nature. And it's so beautiful where Martine Prechtel says the difference with an indigenous person is they don't see themselves as separate from nature. They know they are part of nature. So now you realize that like there's such a larger thread of continuity here that could ever be codified or documented or put in somebody's social media stream or in their lab reports, etc. And it's like Krishna Murti would say, or in the Yoga Sutras, like you have to experience this to know what it is.
Yeah.
That's the awakening thing. And so many of us have become hardened in our hearts. It's like all of the things that we do, the ways that we have behaved because of how we're told we're supposed to feel and act, to be an upstanding member of society and to appear sane in a world that is freaking insane. Just the amount of resources and how they're allocated when there's people who just don't have water or safety or food. I mean, it's literally like, think if that was your own household budget.
Yeah.
And if you were allocating money towards, cosmetic procedures and whatever, you can do what you want, or to having a cache of artillery, and you were starved in your cellular and your soul form, like it literally is insanity. So because of all of that, like the nadi or the spiritual arteries, they clog our hearts and our hearts become hardened. And there's a numbness that is existent, and I love the way that, one of the things that really touched me that Martine Prechtel talks about, which is so like such a beautiful reiteration of the sutra, is how people are flat.
Mm.
And they're really two-dimensional. And that's almost become like a reinterpretation of spirituality. My favorite, least favorite bypass, which is it's all good.
Yeah.
Instead of really being in touch with those deep feelings, because, as we learned in yesterday's sutra, Jati desha kala vyavyahita namapi anantaryam smriti samskaryo yekarupatvat. The only way we can get in touch with our soul's seated desire and purpose is through the emotions, right? So we have the vritti, which are the feelings which are happening, but like where is the deeper layer and the deeper layer and the deeper layer? And when we don't allow ourselves to be in touch with those, we say it's all good, or you'll get better soon. Are you still grieving? We don't allow ourselves to grieve. We don't allow ourselves to praise. We become, as he says, ghosts of who we are. We become a shadow of who we are, as Patanjali says. So, it was so wonderful. I mean, there's just so much to this, right? And I was sharing after our last conversation privately how I was looking up in Prabhavananda's translation, and they were saying like it is better to have intense emotion, even if it's hatred, than no emotion at all. And they were saying how, like, in the yogic cosmology, Judas would not have been relegated to the depths of, the ninth, Dante's nine inferno. Because whenever there's like a being who really radiates love and consciousness and breaking down these social constructs and, commerce in the temple, commerce in yoga. Let's talk about that. Okay.
Yeah.
And as
Yeah.
you wrote in your newsletter, like, this is service.
Yeah.
I'm doing this as an offering. And of course, you're getting so much in return, but it ain't about the money, right?
No.
That like they've always been met with opposition. And on a cosmological level, where it's not Akrishna or Ashukla, where it's not good or bad, we realize that there's this power of duality. And so when there's going to be resistance, that's part of the Leela and the unfolding. So I just remember, going to India, and of course I had to write a letter. I had to say who had sent me. Like, you don't just show up. Now I think India, you can do that. You can go to Rishikesh and do whatever, but you had to write a formal letter. And your letter had to say, I've already been studying with this teacher and they're recommending me to you. And, then you're accepted, and then you have to commit for 3 months of practice, which was minimal. And I remember, my teacher saying, oh, you Annie's student, like already he had a sense of who I was. And where so many teachers had been maybe rubbed the wrong way by my level of energy. I remember this one Howley Sanskrit teacher came, this white guy came, and I had questions because I was already a lover of Sanskrit. I wasn't a scholar. And he said, Bhavani, the whole room is wobbling when you walk in. And it was intense, that he said that.
That's
And here it
intense.
was like, when I walked into this room in India, my teacher saw my shakti,
Yeah.
like the desire. I was in touch with this deeper desire, and it was fueling me.
Mm.
And that's a rare thing, because so many people are just commitment issues. They don't have the necessary passion to break through the frustration, and to realize that the frustration is often indicative of retrieving that thing that can't be grasped,
Mm.
right? It's something that you're seated with, and then we're supposed to be flat, and even our forehead should be flat, and like this filtered, curated presentation
Mm.
of basically like a cookie cutter ideal. Yoga speaks about this wild holiness. Even the sages, we're taking making shapes that are embodiments of deities in their wrathful forms, in their, impassioned forms. We're taking the shapes of animals, we're shape shifting. It's very much an indigenous practice that is pulling from that vitality that initiated all of creation and is our direct line back to source. So this is where, I was like, okay, I need to look this up, because I have a deep feeling and I have a deep knowing, but let's see what the scientists say. So I'm like, what is an indigenous tradition?
Mm.
An indigenous tradition is something that has dance and movement and songs and chanting and ritual and stories that are passed down through a Shravana tradition, a mouth to ear tradition, a heart to heart stream. That's yoga in its original form.
Yeah.
It's clear, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
already knew it and you already knew it.
Yeah.
But like, for those of you who need it to be, you can look it up on the internet yourselves. It is an indigenous form. It's an
And,
evolving science, but it can be like watered down when we don't remember that.
and that piece of nature, when I just thought about how like in touch with, the planetary beings and all of the, astronomical calculations and all of those things as well were so rooted in the culture, in the, I don't even want to say cultures too uh maybe modern, but in the tradition.
Absolutely, like the rishis, the seven rishis are the seven stars of the Big Dipper, which is the movement of those around the North Star, around Polaris, is the shape of the swastika. Like, it's just embedded in all of the imageries and all of the stories. And isn't it so interesting that now yoga has become so much about being in a pristine space that is temperature controlled? I mean,
That cracks me up. Yeah.
it just is so interesting. And like, if that floats your boat, that's great. But, as we mentioned yesterday, and this came from a book of A.G. Mohan, who is one of Krishnamacharya's, longtime students. And he talks about tapas, which is where it's about diligence and perseverance, not just about tormenting yourself.
Mm.
um, and that dedication. And he says it literally means to burn or to heat. And he said, but that should not be confused with cooking a room.
Mm.
Okay. Now it could include that, but it's like it's something that's happening on a deeper level. And when we get in touch with those seed desires, this is what won't let us go into that state of tamas, which is where we have that hardened heart and that blockage in our system. It's where we are impassioned, where we have a drive within us, and it won't let us go to sleep. It's so interesting how so much of our culture is about going to sleep about those things and numbing ourselves out. But to be feeling deeply is a gift of
Mm.
being alive, isn't it?
Yeah. I love how Martin talks about that in his writings in terms of getting more in touch with that indigenous heart inside all of us is the courage to really feel, like in his book Grief and Praise, like, people would grieve full out, tear your hair out, kind of just like weeping, falling down in the streets. And in that tradition, you would have at least 5 or 7 people around you so that you wouldn't hurt yourself or hurt anyone else, but that there was permission given to really, really grieve. And I was just reading this last night, and it was sometime in 300 AD or something like this, where um, out explicit signs and outward show of emotion, specifically in Europe and Rome and like those kinds of places, was forbidden because they said it was basically pagan in nature. It was too close to the earth. And I was like, whoa, we still have carried this on even now in this way of being like, I'm fine, or as you say, like, it's all good, which clearly it's not. But to have those really primal expressions of grief or fear or rage or jealousy or whatever.
Right. And it's like, the like Carl Jung says, and Patanjali, actually Carl Jung is reiterating it. And it's not that any of these guys are the originators. They're just tuned in. They're hungry, right?
Yeah.
Um, is that when we suppress that stuff, it comes out sideways and then it becomes our fate.
Mm.
It's like you can't ignore that stuff and really see it as like, okay, this is stirring the soil, this is rotating, aerating it and bringing out the nourishment and the nutrients. Yeah.
How do you think that people have confused yoga with a religion when it's so clearly not? But let's go a little more in there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And where a religion, well, from what I understand, it means to tie and to unite, right? So, religion in its pure expression isn't a terrible thing. And neither is yoga, but it's when there's an agenda behind it. And I'm trying to remember where I read it first, and I remember talking to Rama about it, where religions are based on belief systems. Yoga is about moving beyond belief systems or BS. And then Rama added to that into direct experience. So this is where you have your own connection. And it's really interesting. My husband talks about this a lot because he, studied the Tarot a lot, and how when there was the schism with the church, so the Tarot was a form of divination,
Mm.
and you were able to have your own direct, the way that we connect, where science proves things, we know things through intuition. Like, how do we even have the intuition to have a scientific trial? So when we get to the depths, we have to get through all the layers of what we think is our intuition, but is in fact bias, a cultural bias. And that's a long process of exploration. Then we start to connect to a deeper knowing. And so there was all these ways that you could do that, right? There was ways of, and basically it was that nimitam, is
Mm.
that there's omens, but omens aren't something that are like premonitions, because we're stepping outside of third dimensional time where things happen in a certain order, krama.
Mm.
But you're just seeing that, like, okay, there's seasons, and there's, like, you're able to see when like a farmer knows that when this leaf turns brown, it's time to plant this food, or when the cows are doing this, it's time for this. They're in touch with the larger sphere. So you could use stars, you could use, like my aunties in Greece would read the coffee grounds. You could use the tarot deck. And then where there was the schism with the church, what happened was they took out the major arcana from the tarot deck, and then we got the playing card deck.
Huh.
And then it became a recreational diversion of playing cards. And I remember, like, I used to say to Ray, we'd be in Greece and, just try, like, learning how to relax again because we worked so damn hard. And I'm like, let's play cards. And he couldn't do it because every hand was a reading for him.
Yeah.
He was looking into all the cards. So, um, this is where there's all this hierarchy is what can often happen. And this, of
Mm.
course, it always just depends on who the conduit is. We're generalizing. I think that somebody who's really embodying spirituality and uses religion as a way of creating community
Hmm.
is able to empower that spirit and that connection within the other. But, what often happens is where you are actually having to have all of these interceding layers, so let's say you're praying to this saint to intercede to Mother Mary, who prays to baby Jesus, who speaks to God the Father, and then to Holy Spirit. And that's not necessarily a bad thing either, but that we have that we have that connection as well, because we come from that.
Mm.
We can gather in communion with that spirit, but it's like it says in the sutras, a good teacher, their job is to set you free, right? So to realize that, like, you have direct connection, and how to access that energy, and how to work with that energy in a way that expands the resonance field. So, so much of the tradition of yoga, it being in the Indus Valley, and then Hinduism kind of coming out of that, a lot of the stories are interwoven. And so people can view it as Hinduism. I maybe even appear as a Hindu, and, because of all my travels to India, and I love sacred artwork. So just being in that milieu, I would be attracted to these pieces and bring them home, but I don't consider myself a Hindu. Um, yeah, it's
Yeah.
like I was just actually watching this great series on Netflix about Moses. And let me see if I can remember the word. And they were talking about how, Pharaoh and the Israelites who were enslaved, and how, when the God of the Israelites came, it wasn't monotheism, it was mono-idolatry. And so there was a recognition that, yeah, there were many, many different gods, but this form of the Judeo future Christian God was saying, forget all those other gods, just pay attention to me.
Wow.
So I don't know, that I thought that was really interesting, you know.
Yeah. Help me with the distinction of mono ideology versus monotheism?
I mean, mono idolatry.
Idolatry. Okay. I
So
don't know
like
what
there's
that is.
many forms of God, you know, but
Ah,
it's
okay.
like, you know, this God wasn't saying I'm was not saying I'm the only one, but it was
Uh-huh.
saying like commit to me, quit playing around, like, you know, let's get in a committed relationship here.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
And I don't
That's
know, and I'm not
cool.
saying that that's the way to be either, because you know, I in my own life, I've been attracted to different strands because I feel like they all hold some part of it, but we, you know, they get lost in all the many layers of agendas and cultural norms. So
Mhm.
we have to kind of like be pulled by what speaks to us, you know?
Mm. It's kind of like, it's focusing one's attention. So it's like, yeah, there's many ways of doing it and ways of experiencing, and it's not that all of those are bad and wrong, and this is like the one only path, but it's almost like just pick something and stick with it.
And we know the like sutra for that. Tat pratishtadartam yeka tattvabhyasaha, right? It provides stability, you know? And, you know, it's like being in a marriage. When you said you've just hit 13 years in your marriage,
Yeah.
I just hit 30 years in my marriage, right? And there's so many cycles within cycles, and sometimes it just feels so fractured, but you have enough longevity to go like, okay, something's going to loosen here, and it literally, like, your marriage can change in a day. It really can, and
Yeah.
it's pretty alarming. And to have a relationship with somebody who sees you through so many different phases, and boy, are you in one now. You know, it's like there is nothing more ferocious than the postpartum mother, Kali. You know, you're in your second trimester now, so it's, you know, you're like a ripe berry, you know, speaking, and then there's going to be going through the portal. And I always say that to fathers, like, just realize, like, with the baby, you've heard this before, but it's going to be really intense, and your job is just to say yes, dear. You take care of her no matter how intense or what she's going through, because the waves are so powerful. You just take care of her, she's going to take care of the baby, and you have to have a little bit of a thicker skin
Yeah.
in those moments, you know. And then it happens again with perimenopause and postmenopausal. But you see all of these phases, and it's that chosen partner. Um, yeah, it's powerful.
So powerful. It's like all the changes, and for both of us to be able to walk together and see the other person as they change. That's for me personally the hardest part is like, whoa, like, okay, they're going down. They can't always be up all the time, but it's like it really means something to me to stay the course.
And also like yeah, like to get comfortable with somebody's discontent,
Mm,
or that maybe they just, this isn't something they're interested in involving in their lifetime, or whatever, you know. It's like you really don't have control. um yeah, it's such a journey. But just like being, you know, making a choice doesn't actually limit your choices.
right.
And that's where I really see, like, for me, yoga is big enough where I can read Martine Prechtel and I can study Dr. Rolf's work and I can study astrology. It just basically, it's like it gives you a context, and it gives the purpose of it being how you can access that deep vasana, that deep seed within you. And what Martine Prechtel speaks about as being intact is where you're in touch, right?
Mm,
And that, I love what you said about that thread of tension. It's
mm,
like it's not always about loosening the tension, is it? Right?
right.
It's like, okay, this is something that's pulling on me, and it's a guideline. I mean, we need, in a healthy structure, in one in which there's tensegrity, there's going to be tension lines, but they're going to move. But there's all, like, it's described like a sailboat.
Mm,
The mast doesn't function unless it has these guidelines and tensions, and the winds are going to change, but then you're able to navigate in a way. And it goes back to this idea where, like, loosening up and it's all good, which is a tamasic state.
mhm,
According to yoga, that's the worst situation, is inertia, is where you're feeling nothing. So in the sutras, it speaks about that all the time. If you, especially in Taimani's book, it was such a revelation, before John Wellwood and spiritual bypassing.
mm,
Taimani said, if you think yoga is somehow going to remove you from the intensity of life, you're completely missing the point.
mm,
You are going to feel more intensely and be moved in a more profound way. And again, what you're doing, you may not experience the results in this generation, but this is where you realize, like, okay, my life means something, and I'm not afraid of my own death. And while I am here, I am going to do something meaningful with my life, because to do otherwise would be to die a slow, painful death. I would rather live a life that is piercing me to the core. And that's scary for a lot of people. They go to yoga class not to feel, actually.
yeah.
They go to yoga class to be seen, to be pushed in the inertia of, like, not being able to actually find that inner stillness, or to be told it's all good.
Mm,
And it is all good, but this is good that has room for light and shadow and all the contrasts within. And to really just, it's like, if we can keep things circulating, right, we're going to have those seasons in our life. We're going to have the highs, we're going to have the lows. And that's where we develop that sense of fluency in our system and fluidity. And I think long ago there was a time where we were talking, and it was like, yoga is about developing fluency in the language of love,
mhm,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what you had said, but there's something about it might have even it was just a few episodes ago, but it was the language of water. So it was wave-like and water-like. I wish I could recall. Yeah.
The great thing is it's just slipped through our fingers.
Like water. Yeah. So I almost want to leave it there, but I'm going to ask you one more question to speak a little bit more about yoga as an attitude, as a psychology, and also as a healing modality.
Whew. I mean, it's hard to think of it as any other way, honestly. And maybe that's because of the sense of urgency that I came into yoga with, um, where I don't know, God just made me that way. And the situation that I was born into, where I just pain, it was like I was just painfully aware of the unmetabolized pain and the high functionality masking the the deeper longing of, I don't even want to say humanity, but I want to say of our nature. Um, so, we get attracted to yoga for different reasons. Then there's those of us where we go there and we, like, it's hard for me to speak other than from my own experience, but where, that vasana, where it was like, oh my God, this is so familiar. I feel like I'm coming home to myself.
Mm.
And it wasn't even a choice. I just knew every cell in my body, every particle, every like heartbeat, every coursing of my bloodstream knew that this was like soul food for me, and that somehow it was going to give me, it was my lifeline. And I can say that like yoga saved my life. Statistically, I should be in an alley somewhere with a needle in my arm. When you look at my history and where I've come from, and this goes, generations back from unmetabolized trauma in war torn countries, etc. Um, so it it's like, if the time is right, and it's such a thing, it's like when the, what do they say, when the student's ready the teacher appears, and when the student's ready the teacher disappears. So it's kind of like all these things kind of line up. There's this inner knowing, um who knows why, but it's like, like for me, I knew I couldn't go against this. It was, I needed it, and I had found it, and it had found me. And I felt I felt safety in the room. Like it was a safe space. I can't really describe it any other way. And then in that safety, it became an opportunity for me to touch those parts of myself that I had to keep so armored and protected. Um, so then it became this process of developing intimacy with myself, and then also feeling like this was something that wasn't interested in, um, me prostituting myself,
Mhm.
selling my soul. It was something that put the power into my lap. And because of, it was before it was like a big, industry. I mean, it breaks my heart to say that yoga is now an industry, and a business, that these people had something inside of them that they were deeply committed to, in which there wasn't a lot of accolades or, spirit or charisma. Now it's like, a charismatic thing. So the love that they carried, the depth of soul that these teachers carried, and the fact that they saw it in me and they wanted to take me on, um, and to encourage me and to teach me how to use this intense fire within myself without burning myself or burning other people. Um, and then again, coming from like the indigenous tradition, where it wasn't just about the body, but there was like all of these other threads that I could go, like it was like walking into the secret garden, where there were so many things to learn and take into myself. It just helped me to like realized that what the culture didn't have room for was something that was really beautiful and really right about me, instead of trying to conform into this different way. So that capacity to tap into my own systems and my own animal and my own structure. And then, of course, having the sutra, which were revelation, because there's so much of like, when you feel like, all right, I'm not like everybody else. And nobody is, right? In that way, we're all the same, is that we're all different. Um, that this was ubiquitous. This was the nature of consciousness. So having that with the sutra, and then over, now I'm 30 years of teaching as well, because I started teaching when I got married, the community and the titration of those students. I mean, I've taught thousands and thousands and thousands of students, and then there's the ones where we found each other, where we can have these really real conversations about things that are not answerable. There are those tensions in life, and we can feel ourselves as part of a bigger context. It allows me to see how much of like you maximize a layer, and then you realize there's like a limit to that layer, and a whole new layer opens. And life is like that, right? It's like you can't ever hold on to any part of it. So it's created a different kind of community. And then it makes you even aware of the like-minded people who may not be doing yoga per se. It could be the very um, arcane group of like the Sufi mystics who still exist today, who go into trance states and actually throw themselves in the fire when they're cooking. Like you know, there's all of these mystical traditions that are out there, and we're kind of like operating on this resonance field. Um, it's such a beautiful it's such a beautiful thing to feel like you're a part of this. It what seems like chaos or continuous decay in our life, because it really, and of course every generation has felt this way, how things are falling apart. You step into this whole other awareness in which you're able to see things not on a literal level, and to really be a part of this shakti and this creative wave and this impulse. It's so hard to put into words.
You're doing a great job.
Am I?
Yeah. I get the feeling comes through. It's there. These things, we can't answer these things. It can't be defined, but the essence keeps coming through.
I mean, I can't operate on superficial levels in that way, and God, so much of me wishes that I could, because life would be so much easier. Um,
Amen, sister.
you know what I mean? But it's like and then I just go, oh my God, um, I don't really want to be that way anyway. So desire, this is actually next week's sutra. Desire is what drives creation forward.
Mm.
And so it's that sense of enlightened desire. And this is where the structures that we hold it in, it'll be true for a certain phase in our life. And then there will be like a dismantling of that dream, and something bigger opens. Um, so it's really the magic that it brings into my life, and holding space for that magic. And also knowing that, like, what I love about yoga is that it's all about your self revelatory capacity. you know, and that's just so exciting. Even the act of like lighting a candle each time we have our podcast, or each time I have my sadhana, I pretty much light a candle every day. It's like, okay, there it is. And what is this thing? And the warmth and the incandescence and um, it's not something I can hold on to, but I can feel it, and I can work with it, and I can build it, and I can keep that ember going in a world where there's not very much intimacy or connection. So for me, that's what it really is. It's like it's that tension wire, that strand, that it's like, okay, this isn't happening to me, or this isn't a terrible thing. This is the way that I am being initiated into love, and I am being decimated by love over and over again. And that's nectar to me.
Thank you so much.
Ask me that question another time.
Okay.
But not next week.
I won't. No, that was
I mean, I want to ask you
primo.
that question. What about you,
Oh
Shanae?
my God. I mean, I feel the resonance. I feel so similarly, is that, um, it's, you know, it's just when I get to be in that stream of, self-revelatory and that mystic capacity, there are no words, but it's being able to see, as you often say, like the spark in someone else's eyes, and like, okay, I'm not alone in this. And it is, it's like my whole world is on fire with these teachings. And there is no fitting into, the societal norms as much as I've always wished that I could. It's finding a different level of being and a way to be more human with other people.
That's beautiful. I love, it's like where they say ritual awakens us to spiritual reality. And this whole construct where we're in charge and we're in control, and this is what success looks like. And even, and I'm not meaning to harsh on AI, but I was working with this gentleman who had developed a rare form of blood cancer from the intense stress of his job, and he was an AI guy, and his whole like the thing that was driving them was immortalizing themselves into some kind of artificial intelligence, like it like making themselves into this um god that was immortal. It was just such an interesting thing to me. And where we realize that, like, yeah, I am going to die, but life is immortal and I am part of this life. And the way I know myself is going to die, it's like, it's like opening the gates into the wonderland that we are. And I was just reading in this little book, and it was saying, like, the way that, like, how do we connect with the greater integrity or the higher power? This sounds so obvious, but we have to get out of our own heads. And then we're going to see it in nature all the time, right? And I know you like to go on walks and things like that, but we feel that as soon as we go out into nature. And how, Martine Prechtel speaks about it as like the joy killing monster machine, which is basically just like we're feeding our own souls into that, prostituting ourselves. If I could just do this, then I'll finally get that. And Patanjali, in No Uncertain Words, says you're not going to be fulfilled by what plays out in the world. It's going to be the inner revelation that brings the fulfillment in the world, right? So that's where we're just like, okay, wow. Rama would speak about it as sacrifice is like throwing yourself in the sacred fire.
Hmm.
this is where we just and what Martine says is like feeding the holy. So like what more could human beings want, right? It's just feeding that holiness. And if we don't, we're going to feel insane in a world of insanity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hariom.
Hariom. Oh man. Yeah, we're gonna leave it there because that was potent. Thank you so much. If there's anything else you want to wrap with, lay it on me.
Stay tuned. Stay in touch. Yeah, that's it. So much love to everyone. Thank you, listeners, for giving us this opportunity to sit with each other.
Yeah, thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.